Partitions are another aspect of database design in a SQL Server that really aren't specifically a data warehouse functionality, but you can use partitions in your data warehouse architecture to really solve a lot of problems. And so I want to mention those here and understand that you will see this as well probably in some form on the exam. And this is not, again, something you would just use in a data warehouse environment. You would use it in a lot of, especially enterprise level SQL Server OLTP implementations, but they become very valuable in data warehouses. So let's talk about them. Well, first of all, fact tables become very large over time because we just keep putting more and more real-time measures in there, and as we sell more and more products, our fact table, every time we do a dump into the data warehouse, just gets bigger. Now, very large database tables can present some serious challenges to the SQL Server administrator. Now, this is true whether it's a data warehouse or not, but this is really becoming a challenge because, as you've probably noticed, we've become a database-centric world. Almost every website, almost every application is tied to a database in the back end, and we're just storing tons of data. So if we've got a really large database like a fact table, what happens when I need to delete a large portion of the data? We decide that we want to remove certain historical data from our database. We've divested our company. We've sold part of it. This data needs to disappear from our data. How are we going to go about doing that? Well, we can just go in and do a delete, but a delete logs that information. It can take a long time to do. And when you get into some of these large databases, I've seen queries. I actually did some consulting on a project one time where a company here in Nashville was sold to a company in New York, and they had to push part of their data up, not all of it, but they were talking about terabytes of data. And what sounded like a simple little, let's go delete part of this data and then push it up to New York, these queries were taking, a day and a half to complete. And so this can really become problematic. So you might think, well, I can use truncate table. This performs the deletions with minimal logging. It's real quick. The only problem is that deletes the entire table, all the data in the table. That's not what we need, so that won't help us. What about large data inserts? These become more and more time consuming because index maintenance and storage starts to become problematic as our table gets larger and larger. And so all of these problems start to slowly grow into larger and larger problems as our tables get larger and larger. Table partitions will deal with all these issues. And so let's talk about partitions here. What is a table partition? This is where, just like it sounds, we're going to take a large table and we're going to partition it off, and actually instead of storing it in one file, we're going to store it in multiple files, and we can put those files in separate locations and different file groups in SQL Server, and we can get all kinds of performance boost based on that. Now in SQL Server, a table partition is a horizontally divided table, which means we're going to put some sort of condition, and this is usually date or time based, where we say, okay, we want to put all of 2009 in one partition, all of 2010 in another, 2011 in another, 2012 in another. And so when we look at the table and we query it and look at it, it looks like this one giant table, but in the background under the hood it's actually stored in 4 or 5 separate files that are horizontally or based on the rows split up into those files. All right. Now, SQL Server 2012 will allow you to create up to 15,000 partitions on a single table. Now, you probably won't need that many right off the bat, but if you look into the documentation in SQL Server 2012, they tell you how to handle some of the challenges that are going to pop up when you start to use a whole lot of partitions on a single table. Don't worry about that on the exam. They won't go there. But partitions and data, all this magic happens in the background. I query the table just like before. I insert into the table just like before. And all the magic happens in the background. And SQL Server can do some very efficient things. So let's take a look. I want to give you a visual here. I've got one really large table. And to back this table up takes a long time. To rebuild indexing takes a long time. To delete certain things takes a long time. All kinds of things start to take a long time. Well, if I partition that into 3 partitions, I end up with, just like you see here, 3 individual files. And so now I can put these in separate file groups and separate locations on separate physical disks, and I can back this section up or this one or this one. I can remove the rows in this partition. I can do all kinds of things. And so now it's like I'm working with 3 smaller files as opposed to this one large one. And it can make a huge difference in the time and the power and the processing and the server load to take care of all these things. So partitions is not uniquely a data warehouse thing, but it is a functionality in SQL Server, and it's out there in most other enterprise database products as well. But for the purposes of this exam, we're talking SQL Server. So go out and read about partitions if you've never used them. Maybe just create one on a table. Just pick a table and create it and divest it into 2 partitions. Just kind of get comfortable with it, because they will ask you about this, or they will expect you to know about this as a solution for very large tables on this exam.